That's better. Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here. I think this is probably one of the largest audiences that I've had in front of me, except when I'm singing on the opera stage, but that's different. So I appreciate you all being here, because I know it's always a commitment of time, and I hope that I have some interesting things to say from our experience at Adacore, which is a little unusual in being a entirely free software company. But a little about Adacore. We're actually two companies. And interestingly, their companies are completely separate legally and economically, but they work as a technical unit. We don't even do accounting for technical time between us. And for our customers, we look like a single company. We're dedicated to FLOSS, which we interpret as freely licensed open source software. And all our products are under GPL or other free licenses. We have about 30-plus people on each side, making a little bit more than 60 people in all. About 10 are full-time equivalents are in marketing, sales, administration. The remainder are technical, although I will say that that's not a sharp distinction. Nearly all our technical people have gone off on sales calls, and we set up a special mailing list for marketing, which immediately all the technical people join. So that's a little bit unusual, I think. Anyway, that's a sort of a thumbnail of our company. I will say one thing up front, is that in the FLOSS world, you hear a lot of ideological statements and discussions. You are not going to hear any ideology from me, not that we aren't committed to the ideology of free software, but it's nothing to do with this talk, which is a commercial talk about commercial advantages of this approach for us and our customers. And that gives a little interesting different spin, I think, on things. What do we do? Our original concentration was on Ada 95 compilers. We came into being because Chris Anderson of the Ada 9X project figured that an open, freely available Ada compiler was important. And one of the very interesting contracts that was signed in history was between the Army and New York University, which required us to make everything under the GPL and to assign the copyright to the Free Software Foundation when we were done. It was quite interesting. You had mentioned at the beginning of universities trying to scrabble after every little bit of IP they can get their hands on. And at the end of that Ada contract, the guy from NYU came along and said, "Oh, I want to talk to you about commercial dissemination of this thing." I said, "No, you have to sign over the copyright to Free Software Foundation. There's nothing for you here." "Oh, I'm not sure we want to do that." Well, I said, "Well, not my $3 million. If you want to give it back, that's fine with me. But that's the contract you signed." So a little bit of interesting history there. Distribution's available for multiple targets. We cover native and embedded systems, and we've moved much more into the real-time operating system. We have a close partnership with Wind River. We have a number of partnerships with proprietary companies. We're not allergic to that. It's a reality that many of the tools that our customers need are in the proprietary world. That includes Wind River. We've continued the strong Ada emphasis, but we've branched out more generally. And we support C and C++ as well as Ada, although that's primarily for our customers who are doing mixed language programming. We have a rich set of tools for Ada development, and we've moved into a safety and security focus. That's natural because Ada, the place where Ada is generally used and recognized as having special strengths is in safe and secure programming. For instance, NASA handbook notes that Ada is the most suitable language for safe and secure programming. Too bad they don't read their own handbook a little bit more, but that's another story. So we built a number of specialized tools for safety and security work. We have a partnership with Praxis. Praxis is an interesting case. I'll mention this later. They were a highly proprietary company, but over 10 years, I talked to them and finally convinced them that it was in their interest to open source all their software under the GPL. And as a result, we work very closely with them. We market their software and we work together. That's an interesting endeavor, convincing companies which have this view of their software as crown jewels which are locked up in a safe, and if your competitors got hold of it, it would be a catastrophe, and convince them that's all nonsense. And I sometimes think that the best thing that could happen to a company is your competitors waste time looking at your software. Our customers, you can find a big list on our website, but it's generally large scale. Avionics has been a major focus, both commercial and military. Defense systems are somewhat less than half our total business, but coming up to half. Space systems. The Canadian Space Arm, interesting to mention, was the first safety critical application that we were involved in. And air traffic control, Eurocontrol, I'm sure, is represented here today at FOSDEM. And the new ground-based air traffic control system for UK, that's IFACS, is interesting because it's developed using formal methods aggressively through the whole process. So, our business model. Well, we sell software, appropriately licensed software with licenses, we updates and support. Nothing unusual about that. And quite a theme here is that there's nothing unusual about Ada Core. It isn't some weird company. We're using licenses that are freer than other people, but there's nothing weird about it. It's a high-end product with intensive support, being used in complex, large-scale systems. And to give an idea, the minimum pricing is in the range of 20K euros a year. So this is high-end software. It's not what you pick up in your local software store. We were founded in 1994, the European company a couple of years later. No outside funding. We've run from revenue from the start, and we've been consistently profitable. Not hugely profitable. We're not getting rich like Bill Gates, but we're doing fine, and we managed to pay ourselves good salaries and stay afloat. If you look at the revenue and revenue pattern for Ada Core, it looks like this. It's just a straight line sloping upwards. When all the rest of the software world was doing this, we neither went up with them nor, thankfully, down with them. And that's really a reflection of the fact that these are large-scale projects. So, how we present freely licensed open source software. Much more on this later, but in a brief introduction, we tend to use the term open source. I'm sure that will make Richard Stallman a little unhappy, but it's not the place for some ideological discussion of the difference between the two. I will look at the difference between the two later on, and it's a very it's a familiar term to people, whereas free software, in English, not in French, but in English, free is a really annoyingly overloaded word, which causes infinite misunderstanding. So better avoid it in initial contact. This is a 15-slide introduction to our customers, and that's what the one slide that mentions the open source advantage. Source code included, no annoying locks and CRUD keys with licensing software, and no limit on the number of installs or anything like that. Really convenience features. Source code included is a significant factor if you think of a large runtime library. It means no black boxes. You have all the source. I actually had an interesting conversation with Lockheed Purchasing at one time a few years ago. It says, oh, you didn't fill out the source escrow part of the agreement. Well, I said, it's totally irrelevant. Oh, no, we have to have a source escrow. Well, you already have all the sources. Well, we have to have all the sources. I just told you, you have all the sources. And furthermore, you can do absolutely anything you like with them within pretty broad limits. And if we give you any updates, we give you all the sources. It took a good 15 minutes to reprogram her to realize, I guess we don't need a source escrow agreement. Anyone been around when a source escrow is open? It's sort of like opening an old grave. You find a lot of rotting bits that are completely useless to man or beast. One of the important things about free software is not only do you get the sources, but they have to be useful and actually able to build a system from them. Our pricing model, we use a subscription model. That in 1994, that was fairly innovative, although many companies have followed suit. A constant annual payment, typically start with a one-year contract and renewed yearly if the customer chooses to do so. Licenses are perpetual. We could play games there, but we don't. So licenses are perpetual. So at the end of a year, a customer has the option to use the software forever without paying us another dime if they choose. We specifically avoid the pay up front model. Interestingly, over a very long term, we're pretty expensive. But, you know, the customer, that's only if a customer finds our support worthwhile. And we also offer some long-term deals. You know, many of our customers are writing programs they expect to be maintaining and running for 30 years. So, just some comments on the advantages of this pricing model. Customer interest and ADA-Core interests are aligned. We make our money when customers renew, and they only renew if they find it useful. So it's in our interest to be useful. And I like that alignment between the interests of a company and its customers. You know, you can listen to all the good intentions you like, but it's more convincing if you know that those good intentions correspond to enlightened self-interest on the part of the company. In fact, if we sign up a customer and they don't send us any support requests, we worry. It sets off alarms, and we send someone out to explain to them that they actually might find our support useful. Unlike their experience with most companies, because there are many companies, no names, which use the pay up front model, and it might better be called the take the money and run model, because they don't provide much from there on. They've got your money. They're more interested in selling to other customers than they are in supporting you. How does our support work? It's interesting that many people think, oh, well, since you're selling free software, you're not really selling the software. I mean, there's nothing there. You're just selling support. Bogus. We definitely are selling the software as well, but the support is a very important component, most certainly. We don't have a support staff. If you get on the phone or send email, you're talking to the developers directly. All our developers are involved in direct support of customers. And I'll just make a comment. This is not really a FLOSS-related comment, but I think many companies make a mistake in insulating their top developers from customers, because it's interesting to talk to customers who are using your software and are enthusiastic about it. And all our developers find, I think, that's a considerable source of satisfaction. So just a note on what I think is a bit of mismanagement. Customers report bugs, but if they do, often they aren't bugs, but if they are, we provide workarounds. And if necessary, new patch releases. I mean, we have a very reactive kind of support, mostly done online. We cover a ridiculous number of time zones from Moscow to west coast of the US. And so someone is online all the time. I mean, people get used to it. If they get an error message they don't understand, it's quicker to send email than to go and look in the manual. And we kind of encourage that, you know. It's a reasonable sort of thing to encourage. Just, I won't go through all the things. Incidentally, these slides can be made available. I don't know how that works, but I mean, I'm sure there's some sort of FOSDEM arrangement for making them available. And I'll just say that our test suite is tens of millions. It's probably 30 or 40 million lines of code, maybe more now. Mostly highly proprietary code from companies like Boeing and Lockheed. And it's the one part of our system that's super duper proprietary and protected in all the ways you can think of protecting. Everything else in our system is freely open, but that has to be protected. And consequently, it's something we can't distribute. I mean, we make little tests to give to FSF, but we can't give FSF our test suite. Our licensing approach, all the tools are GPL3. NatPro itself is a front end for GCC. All our runtime libraries are modified GPL that permit unrestricted use in executables. That's the GCC model. It's sort of interesting that if you took a very pure, I think sometimes people expect Richard Stallman to be sort of highly ideologically driven and very pure, but he's much more pragmatic than you might think, and he's always taken the view that, well, he'd prefer everyone was writing free software, but if they're going to write classified proprietary software or whatever, he'd prefer they would be using free software tools. And he's always taken that viewpoint, and that's why it's kind of key in our approach. I mean, nearly all our customers are developing proprietary tools. Some of them are developing deep black classified stuff. We don't even know what they're doing. So obviously that is about as far from free software as you can get. But our licensing is such that that's not a problem for our customers. Things are very freely licensed from that point of view. Our relationship with the FSF, we work very closely with the FSF and the GCC and GDB communities. Just an example, Joel Brobeck, who's a full-time employee of our company, is the release manager for GDB and spends a lot of his time on sort of managing the GDB effort. Of course, to our advantage, too, GDB is an important tool for us. GNAT is an ADA front end for GCC, so naturally we depend on all the work done on GCC. IA-64 is just an interesting example to answer. That's a very hair-raisingly complicated machine to generate code for. But the Trillium Consortium invested many millions of dollars into producing pretty good GCC code generator for IA-64. Boom, we have an IA-64 version of GNAT. Not no work, it's never zero work to do a port, but it's, we didn't have to develop our own code generator, which would have been out of the question for us. I mean, I know I worked with Ulsys for many years, another ADA company, and it was many person years to generate a new code generator. For us, we can, if GCC community supports a backend, we can pretty easily generate an ADA compiler for it. We contribute back all our updates and modifications to the ADA front end and to the GCC backend and to GDB. Not all our tools are at the FSF because some of them are much too specialized. For instance, they relate to certification of avionics software, which really is not what the GCC community is about. The LibreSite and the GPL version are dedicated to free software development aimed at the academic community. This is a common approach used by free software companies, often referred to as dual licensing. So the licensing, this is all our latest software qualified by us with our Magic Test Suite, and it's not identical bit for bit just because of a different release cycle, and actually we tend to push things out to the academic community a bit faster sometimes. But it's licensed under the pure GPL, so not suitable for proprietary development. So that's a common approach. We do incidentally provide free support for all academic users of in universities that teach ADA. There are several hundred of them enrolled in that program. We provide free support. So, you know, a question you ask, and this is always something you ask if you set up a company around free, well, why don't people just get the FSF version? It's free. They can download it. Well, there's many reasons. For this kind of software, support is crucial. Actually, a large number of companies mandate the availability, mandate having support contracts. I even see that open source for many companies, particularly, say, Lockheed, has become synonymous with miscellaneous engineers downloading miscellaneous stuff from the internet with no assurance that it's properly licensed or anything else for that matter, and incorporating it who knows where and causing who knows what chaos legally and technically. I mean, that's what open source means to them. And I understand that concern, but it's kind of important to realize that that's one particular thing you might do. It's not that all open source is in that category. And I encourage companies to be very careful about developing appropriate training programs and so on for the use of free software and understanding what the thing is. And it's very reasonable to restrict the use of freely downloaded stuff. I was talking to the Navy once, and the guy from the Navy said, oh, you know, our lawyers have told us that if we redistribute GPL software, we may have some legal liabilities. I said, I'm sure your lawyers are correct. You always have legal liabilities when you go distributing things. Why on earth would you be in the business? The Navy isn't in the business of software distribution. Why on earth are you even talking about redistributing GPL software? You don't redistribute Microsoft software, I trust. Well, you know, it's a part of what, yeah, it's part of what you can do with the GPL. It doesn't mean it's a good idea, and that's very important to realize. It's up to an individual company to decide what they will and will not take advantage of in the GPL. And redistributing it to other people is at the bottom of the list in almost all cases. But, you know, for most people, the support is easily worth the price of admission, and nearly all serious development with ADA, not all, but nearly all, is done using the supported versions. I'd just like to alert everyone to this very annoying thing of saying commercial versus open source software. That's totally bogus opposition. I mean, we're a commercial company. Commercial means you're engaged in commerce. You're selling stuff and making money and putting food on your table as a result. And there's nothing incompatible with commercial and open source. So, you can contrast proprietary software with FLOSS, but every time you see someone doing this, you jump up and stamp on them because it's an annoying figment of the imagination. And part of the trouble, we live in a world here where there are some very big companies, and I don't hesitate to name Microsoft as one of them, who are in the business of trying to convince people that open source is a dangerous communist plot or something like that. If you haven't read the Halloween documents, be sure to do so. The first Halloween document, called that because they were released from the inside of Microsoft around Halloween, said, gosh, open source is a big threat. We have to proprietarize all our interfaces and fight back against open source as a threat to the commercial software world. Well, the second Halloween document released a year later said, that didn't work so well. We seem to have had a huge backlash. How about instead we emphasize the value of good support and deep pocket support? Well, we quite like the Halloween 2 document, but they make good reading. So look, you find them on Google easily. Just Google for Microsoft Halloween document. So there's huge confusion over what open source and free software mean, even among people who are in the community. So I'm going to show some slides that I show commercially now, which some of you will learn something from, even if you think you know all about it. Some will know all this stuff, but so open source is a relatively new term, and it refers to the notion of freely providing sources and encouraging a wide community to participate in development. Major companies find it quite a good idea. Gosh, maybe we can get all these volunteers to write software for us, and we'll get it free. Sounds good to us. I mean, that's some of the positive reaction you get to open source from companies. Claims are made for better quality, better security, but you know, in practice, some open source projects are junk and some are good. I don't think there's much of a correlation really there. Free software, coined a long time ago by Richard Stallman, refers to the notion of ensuring that users and recipients of the software can do what they like. And that's quite a different emphasis, because the emphasis is on freedom for users rather than open development. And that's a different emphasis. I'll just comment that this term gets mixed in with things very freely, open systems. And for me, open system is one built with components with well-defined open interfaces and no secret interfaces. Isn't it amazing that so many people in the world are using Windows, which has a secret kernel interface? I mean, that's one of Microsoft's guarded secrets, is what the interface to the kernel is. You can know the interface to Win32, but the interface between Win32 and the kernel is guarded secret. So the idea is that anyone should be able to plug anything in. And a real open system is one that adheres to that philosophy throughout. There's an amazing counterexample for that. Microsoft wanted to get Windows approved for use by the Navy, and the Navy required that it use only open systems. And an open system was defined as one that supported POSIX. So Microsoft produced a POSIX subsystem whose only known capability was passing the POSIX test suite, and they passed the POSIX test suite, and the Navy says, wonderful, Windows is an open system, and we can use it freely. That was somewhat before they had the experience of the frigate 50 miles off coast from its maiden launch, finding blue screens of death on every console in the ship and having to be tugged back into port. Incidentally, the Navy conducted a full inquiry of that, and they absolved Windows of any liability because an application had made an illegal call to the operating system, so obviously it was all the fault of that application's program. Windows didn't have any responsibility. We live in a strange world sometimes. One of the important, generally in free software, sources are available, so generally you have an open source community around free software projects, but not always. There's nothing which requires free software things to be distributed. I mean, just because I I create a GPL product, doesn't mean I have to give it to you. You can't, for instance, if you want to get the latest version of GNAT Pro, produce a check if you want to get a copy of it. So I think if you look at open source, there are pluses and minuses. It's not really clearly an advantage for users. Basically, how do you care what the development process of the software is? What you depend on is the quality of the software, and that's really, it's irrelevant whether it was developed openly or, you know, there are pluses and minuses, but it's not a big issue to users, whether users of software, what the development process is. Whereas for free software, the ability to do anything you like is valuable. And one of the interesting bits of education we have to do with our users is convince them that free software is entirely to their advantage. There's no disadvantages. And I like to do this. You know, Microsoft sells exclusively proprietary programs with a restricted license. We sell programs covered by a free software license, so that's completely different. Actually, it's not completely different. It's amazingly similar. We both sell software with support. The software is copyrighted, and you can't copy or use it without a license. We provide a license that allows you limited rights to copy, and you pay for the combination of software support and appropriate license. We're just like Microsoft, you know, and that's a useful message to give to the, we aren't some weird sort of academic lunatics doing something strange. We're just doing what software companies that they're used to dealing with do. The only difference is our license, but it's quite a difference because the license conditions are very different. Certainly what's going on with Microsoft is they're limiting what you can do, and we tend to open up what you can do. So a very important thing is that anything the Microsoft license allows is also allowed by the Ada Core license. But the Ada Core license is much more permissive. That has to be overall a good thing. I'm going to skip these few slides which talk about what happens if you copy software. You're in big trouble with Microsoft. With us, it's not an issue. So people do, you know, they worry very much about the virus issue. So I talk here about what happens if you obtain sources and modify them and distribute them and point out it's fine with us, but not fine with Microsoft. So I'll skip these. So people actually aren't interested in modifying the compiler, but what about the runtime? Don't my programs include some of your runtime? And the answer is they do, and that's where you really need to be careful, because the GPL, of course, is a barrier to use of code within your application. Good example, thank you. Good example is Cygwin. Cygwin is pure GPL software. It has found its way into many proprietary places it doesn't belong because people don't know enough to realize they can't just download Cygwin from the Red Hat site and play around with it. They have to pay Red Hat for the alternatively licensed version that is legitimately used in their program. So you have to be very careful with licenses all the time, and free software, you have to be very aware that you can't do things with GPL software. Now, with Microsoft software, you can't do them either, but everyone knows you can't copy PowerPoint and give it to people, or you shouldn't anyway. They tend to not make enough distinction between GPL software and public domain where you can do absolutely anything you like. So there is a real education effort required. So it's important to understand that pure GPL can be an issue from the point of view of software. So you really need to worry and check licenses and make sure they're suitable for use. And I have this example here, the Cygwin example. Well, we give a very clear license statement that says everything is under the modified GPL. You can do anything you like with it. There are no problems. We still have one big company that said, oh, you know, we don't believe that, and they insisted we give them a much more restrictive license. Okay. They know they have the GPL license too, but if you really want a much more restrictive license, here you are. Here's your much more restrictive license. Oh, we're happy now. Yeah, interesting. I won't name that company. They have an attorney there who is just a nightmare to talk to. I'm pretty good at talking to attorneys about this thing, but this guy was a nightmare. So that's a little bit about how the modified GPL works, that makes sure that you can use this in proprietary libraries. Now, I will say that there are dangers in FLOSS. Here's the first danger that people think happens, that somehow if you accidentally or deliberately include GPL software in your program, and then you have to, that's found out, somehow you automatically lose your intellectual property rights and you have to distribute all your source. Total nonsense. And it's very important to know that the GPL never forces anyone to distribute anything under any circumstances whatsoever. It's just a license. It's not some kind of a requirement. So what's going on here? Let's suppose you can offer a GPL license to someone, but it never happens automatically. So you somehow, just because you incorporated some GPL software in your software, it doesn't mean that when you distribute that, you've offered a GPL license to the recipients. There's nothing like that. What does it mean? It means if you don't offer a GPL license to your recipients, you're in the same situation you would be with Microsoft. You've committed a copyright violation, and someone may come after you for that copyright violation. I mean, generally, the FSF tries to keep cases out of court. It's better not to have courts making judgments on complicated issues and settle things out of court. But they do vigorously protect the copyright rights. So what's this business about having to redistribute the sources? Well, let's suppose you're found guilty of copyright infringement. You have to pay a fine. Now you have to cure the situation. Normally that's done by replacing the software with something that isn't infringing. You could, if you like, instead in the GPL situation say, oh, okay, no problem, we'll just open source all our thing. I think it's relatively unlikely that a company like Boeing making commercial avionics software or Raytheon making classified military software would choose that route. I very much doubt they would. Well, then they're no worse off than they would be with Microsoft. That's the important thing. You're no worse off. But you need this, this fear of automatic loss of IP is a common one. You never could be forced to distribute your sources. That can never, ever occur. And if that's news to people here, worth investigating and learning more and making sure that Dewar is not talking nonsense, but actually describing the true situation. This is a very important thing. I'm not going to go through all of this, given the colored signs that have been waved at me, but the real point here is that if you're a big company, you have to devote some resources to education of your programming staff if you're using open source FLOSS. They have to understand what they can and cannot do and make sure they don't do the things they cannot do. And so I do see a danger in lack of education. There's a nice article in the latest ACM, which is worth reading on, it's a study of use of open source, and it makes the same point of the need for education. So this is actually, this slide I think I made in a talk to BAE in London, talking to their management. And I spend a lot of time saying this is a responsibility you have in management, is to make sure that your programming technical people understand these legal issues, because they're the people who are going to make the decisions, and you need to be able to control that and make sure they don't get you into trouble. As I say, they would also be in trouble if they distributed Microsoft software, but Microsoft's done enough lobbying for people to know they shouldn't do that sort of thing. I mean, I'm sure it happens to some extent, but people know that it's dubious. And again, improper inclusion of GPL software is something that your users need, your programmers need to know they can't do. GPL software is not the same as public domain. Another thing to fight back against. If you ever see newspaper people or people like that referring to GPL software as public domain, they should be stamped on. Actually, there's no such thing as real public domain software in most of Europe. I can't speak, the laws aren't consistent, but in France, there's no such thing as public domain software. You cannot, however much you try, give up all your rights as an author in Europe. You can in the US, but not in Europe. That's interesting. You can't say, deny copyright claims and say this is in the public domain. Not something you can do as a French author. I suspect most other European countries are the same, but I don't know that law is not uniform. So there are real risks in distributing GPL software, and this is the same thing I talked to the Navy about. You probably don't want to distribute software. Now, you might think, one of the things people think, oh, why don't people just freely distribute GNAT Pro to the world? Well, the fact of the matter is Boeing is not in the business of distributing software to Lockheed. What possible reason would they have for doing that? First of all, they'd have some legal liability if they did. And what gain would they have? It never happens. We never have people redistributing software. Occasionally, we'll have people distribute software within a company to another group, and if we hear about that, we say, hey, get a free evaluation with full support for your new group. You know, we're perfectly happy to do that. But the redistribution is really not an issue for us. Warranties are an interesting issue. Warranties tend to be stronger with open source software that comes from a commercial company, but the industry is not very interested in software warranties. I think they've got used to the fact that software comes with no warranty at all from big companies, and Praxis offers full warranties of their software, but most customers are not terribly interested. That's an interesting phenomenon. So FLOSS conclusion is that the FLOSS licenses like the GPL give you many rights. Just because a license gives you many rights doesn't mean you have to take advantage of it. So if there are things that worry you as a company, don't allow them. Make your own policies and don't allow them. And education is important. So sort of getting to the end of some bottom line. We're a successful commercial company that shows that FLOSS can work in a commercial setting. People keep asking us how we make a living. It's really a funny question. And we always say we do it the same way any other company does, by selling high-quality software at a reasonable price. But couldn't people redistribute all your stuff? Yes, but you wouldn't get new versions, you wouldn't get support. And the support is critical. I mean, many of our customers writing certified software actually have to audit our quality assurance procedures. I think it would be an interesting attempt to try and do a quality assurance audit of the GCC development community. I mean, I have no idea what that would mean. I'm sure you couldn't do it, in fact. Now, perhaps the most interesting thing is, would this approach work in other cases? Depends. Seems like it works best when there's a significant need for support. It's certainly not the case that we're only selling support, but if there was no support component at all and the software was never updated, then I don't see that the model, I mean, why would people pay a yearly charge if they don't get anything from it? They wouldn't. A thought experiment. Could Microsoft open source Windows? I bet they could. I bet they could, and I bet it wouldn't make too much difference to them, because imagine you're buying a PC with Windows. Which do you want to save $20 by getting the dubious version from some dubious Chinese company that's described in language that clearly wasn't written by people who understand English, and won't come with any security updates or anything like that from Microsoft? Or will you pay 20 bucks to get the real one? I think most people will pay 20 bucks to get the real one. That's my guess. The security updates alone are pretty important. It's an interesting thought experiment because, you know, it's one place, Microsoft certainly has the ultimate view of proprietary software being key to their thing. I wonder. How about a company making games, opening sourcing them? I think games are an interesting case. Developing a modern graphical game is costing in the cheap movie range, which means $5 to $10 million to generate one of these games. Isn't that amazing? But you know, they're huge enterprises, and they really are. It's like shooting a movie. So, and then they really seem to depend on copyright for successful distribution of those games at a cheap price, just as movies do. I mean, it's pretty clear that the movie business depends on copyright working to protect completely free sharing of movies. I have an interesting discussion with Stallman on that, because he disapproves of copyright in all respects. And I say, well, how would movies like Titanic get made? And Stallman's answer was, well, maybe we don't need movies like Titanic. Not an acceptable answer. Millions of people want movies like that. So I find that, you know, copyright protection at that level seems appropriate to me. It doesn't seem appropriate that it lasts 90 years, but that's another issue. I do think we've been successful in convincing other companies to use floss for their products, most notably Praxis, which has, I mean, Praxis is a big company now owned by Alcatel and has always taken the position that they have this incredible wealth of IP in their stuff. We convinced them to GPL the whole lot of it. And it hasn't, you know, there's no ill effects from them. There's only the very positive effect that now universities are showing more interest in their products because they're now freely available, and people can not only use them but tinker with them. I mean, there are a lot of universities that are very amenable to the idea of free software because it lets your students and faculty tinker with things. And, you know, what are universities but giant tinkering outfits and hacking outfits? That's what they're about. So when it comes to software, it's a very natural match to have open source software. And SoftCheck, which actually, as of last month, we acquired SoftCheck, or it's a merger. It's now part of Adacore. But before that, quite a bit before that, we convinced them to open source their inspector technology, which is the basis of the product CodePeer. It's a static analysis tool. And again, you know, they had investors who invested millions of dollars who regarded that CodePeer source code as crown jewels of valuable intellectual property. But we convinced them to open source it, and it's been wholly beneficial for them. So that, incidentally, I'll just say that if you're ever in a situation where I'm always happy to give talks to management on that kind of thing, you know, why you should open source your products. So you can regard me as a resource person in that regard, and I've had some successes. We think the model could be used much more widely. And I do think that if there's one thing you get from this talk, it's that we aren't a strange company. We're doing the same thing other companies do, just with a license that is much more convenient for our users and much more effective for our users. So, you know, every company is in the business of giving users what they want and being responsive to user needs. And we regard our dedication to FLOSS as part of giving our users what they need. And it's interesting because, you know, our users are really the traditional hardcore developers in major companies rather than people hacking around with free software projects. The very opposite end. But they've come to understand that it's a real advantage, the fact that we open source all our products. So I hope this talk has been interesting and that you've all learned something or other from it. There's lots of interesting, there's so much confusion in this field that I find even those people who are very involved in open source often confused in various ways. So part of your mission, if you're involved in open source, is to really try and understand all the ins and outs of this. Thank you very much for your time. I'll be happy to take some questions. There are 3 microphones here. If you'll trump to one of the microphones, that will be the most effective way of answering questions. And thank you again for the opportunity. Yes, go to one of the microphones if you can, please. That's your...
I guess I'll start. I was curious if, is all the software in Adacore written by your developers? You never accept any kind of modifications from your clients or otherwise into the software that you distribute?
Sorry, I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Is your software 100% written by your own developers?
Well, quite a bit of it was written by people at NYU. Happens to be the same people with different hats on. And no, big chunks of our software were not written by us. In particular, the whole back end of GCC is written. I'm sure there are many people in this room who have contributed to that. and we make full use of that software. So, you know, we benefit from the fact that we're part of the open source community and use that development. Yeah, well, yes, that seems to be the microphone of choice.
Hello. Firstly, thank you, because Ada is a great language, and thanks for being open source and successful. Actually, my question is to...
Can we keep the noise down apart from the questions so I can hear them?
My question is about the reception you get to your arguments. I mean, there are many companies, you cite Microsoft, but there are many other companies whose single biggest marketing objective is to say, open source is crap, we do the same thing but better. Yes. So what's the kind of reactions you get? How often is it successful?
We certainly encounter that. I mean, there are some very interesting examples. Since this is all on their website, I don't feel bad about giving a name. Green Hills seems very positive to open source in Europe, but very negative in the US, and definitely plays, oh, you know, this is... Two kinds of things are done. One is to say, if you're using Linux, that's dangerous. You might have to distribute all your sources. Better to keep your hands off open source systems. Bogus, but a powerful argument that needs refuting. And then you can say, well, you know, our software is higher quality, etc. But, you know, our response to that is, first of all, it's not much use listening to software companies tell you how good their software is. What we encourage, and we're very open on giving free evaluations with support. We say, get our software, use it with full support, and you find out whether it has the quality you need. And I think that's a powerful argument, and there's one you have to really push, because my belief is that there's no basis for claiming that proprietary software is higher quality or open source is higher quality. I know plenty of plenty of examples in both directions. And certainly the fact that the system is proprietary is not guarantee that it's a brilliant system that you want to use. You know, we don't need to put names on that, but we all know that.
Thank you.
Is there a question over this side?
Yep, I was very interested by the point you said about you get core developers to do support requests. How do you actually manage the split with their time with respect to development and doing the support requests?
And support time? Well, actually for us, support always comes first. So, you know, the way our support model works is someone sends an email message, it goes to all the developers in the company, and whoever can answer it quickly answers it. Otherwise, it gets assigned to one person, and they are responsible for completing it. And I personally oversee the whole support operation. So yes, there's a balance. There's always more things to do than we have time to do. That's true, I think, of any environment. I'm getting a time's up red notice from the gentleman in the front. So I think we ought to close off the questions now, but I'm up here, so I'm happy to answer some questions in person. And thank you again for your attention and for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you very much for that.